Now, Israeli strikes on Gaza are reported to have killed more than 100 people. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the attacks after claiming that Hamas had broken the terms of the US-backed ceasefire and had attacked Israeli forces. Earlier this week, President Trump was confident the ceasefire would hold.
I think it'll hold, yeah. Oh,
So do they believe it will?
Well, if it doesn't hold, if it does hold, that would be Hamas. Hamas will be not hard to take care of. It will be very quickly. But I hope it holds for Hamas too, because they gave us their word on something. They said they took out gang members. Well, I hope that's right. But they gave us their word on something, so I think it's going to. And if it doesn't, then they'll have a very, very big problem.
Well, let's talk to Mick Mulroy, a former US Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Good evening to you, Mick.
Good evening to you, Carol. Good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining us. I mean, we've had accusations from both Israel and Hamas that the others have broken this ceasefire, and clearly there has been violence. We're now seeing these reports that 100 people were killed overnight in those Israeli airstrikes. Where do you think this leaves the ceasefire?
Well, obviously, this is not a good sign. There's certainly many other groups, armed groups in Gaza that could be attacking the IDF, but it could be Hamas. Ultimately, if these happen, IDF is going to defend themselves, of course, and there's going to be breaks in the ceasefire. The question is, can they get back on track, go back to a ceasefire, and continue down the end of the first phase, going into the second phase of this 20-point plan? That's the question. And of course, the biggest issue coming up in the second phase of this is whether Hamas will disarm or not.
Yeah, I mean, what we've had over the last 24, 48 hours is originally Israel was angry that Hamas was failing to properly return the bodies of dead hostages. There were then reports of an attack on some Israeli forces. But I mean, those overnight attacks, they were pretty widespread, devastating airstrikes. No independent corroboration, but we are hearing more than 100 people killed. Is it your understanding that the US did give the Israelis the go-ahead to carry out those attacks?
So that's a good point, Carol. I mean, obviously well, at least to me, it doesn't look like it was just a retaliation to defend themselves. They had pre-planned targets they wanted to take advantage of if they were attacked. And I think that's what happened here. Whether the United States approved it or not, I don't think the Israelis are going to ask for every tick for tack on this thing, but I do think the United States would weigh in if it continued, because it's obviously a U.S. plan that was presented and agreed to by many in the region at Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. And so the U.S. is definitely pushing to make sure it continues to go. But I just don't know if they would be an actual request if the Israelis are saying it's a response to an attack on their forces.
Yeah, the US has publicly acknowledged that Israel has a right to respond to attacks, but is said to be urging restraint. Is the wider problem here that we had that big ceremony, the peace deal, which of course was a big achievement in itself, and we have had the release of the 20 remaining living hostages, but that there was so much of the detail as to what happens next that simply wasn't spelt out.
That's right. I mean, this is a general framework of a plan. If they would have waited for every detail to have been agreed to, it probably never would have been agreed to. So I have to give them credit on that. But the issue is really Hamas. Hamas, from Israel's perspective, can't remain armed. They can't be part of the future governance of Gaza. That's not only their requirement, it's also the requirement, as we saw King Abdullah of Jordan say, there's not going to be an international peace or peacekeeping force, a stabilization force, if Hamas is still armed and refuses to disarm. And we've seen a lot of GCC countries say they're not going to fund the reconstruction if Hamas is still armed. So it really does come down to that from Hamas's perspective, not that we care about it, but if they disarm entirely without any guarantee of security, there's a lot of armed factions inside Gaza that want to take retaliation against Hamas. So they would feel very vulnerable. So there has to be an address of how that would happen and how they would, either they leave Gaza, I don't know which country would take them, or there's some kind of security zone where they're protected inside Gaza, or it's likely they simply won't disarm.
But I mean, there is a huge problem here, isn't there? Of the general lawless nature in Gaza, let alone the scale of the devastation that there is there. Hamas, in under those circumstances, it's difficult to see them handing over their weapons without some kind of process. It's difficult to see them getting to that stage unless we've got some kind of stabilization force on the ground. And as you've pointed out, many of those states that have indicated a willingness to be involved in these kind of operations, I mean, they're not going to fight their way into Gaza. They're not going to go in without an agreed UN mandate, without proper terms and so on. And all that is going to take quite some time, isn't it?
It is. There's some talk that the U.S. will introduce a resolution in the UN this week about an international stabilization force that could give them the authority. But all these countries are, of course, independent and have to make their own decisions on when they would be able to contribute. And they have to be trained and integrated. Just, being a soldier doesn't mean you're ready to be a peacekeeper in a very volatile place like this. But I do think it's fair to say, and King Abdullah obviously speaks for Jordan, not the rest of them, but I don't see any country willing to go and essentially replace the IDF and start fighting Hamas. That just doesn't seem to be, anything that any of these countries that have talked about this would be willing to do. So there really has to be a understanding with Hamas, the disarming of Hamas, the security that they would, of course, require. And they've never actually agreed to disarm. That's one thing that's kind of been gone over with this 20-point plan. It calls for them to disarm, but Hamas has never said that they would. So unfortunately, if that doesn't happen, we can see how this could turn and major combat operations could start again, which would be devastating to the people in Gaza. So hopefully there can be a way to figure this out, but I would acknowledge it's certainly no easy solution.
Yeah, I mean, when you spell out those problems there, how great do you think is the risk that this whole ceasefire could break down before we even get to these next stages? We've had President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance insisting, oh, well, the ceasefire is holding. This is just some retaliation. And of course, there are always going to be some kind of incidents during this. But I mean, if these problems aren't resolved, you've now had those pretty widespread airstrikes. If there are then further attacks on Israeli forces, there's then further retaliation. Do you think there is a real risk that the whole thing could break down?
I do think there's a real risk. I certainly hope that President and Vice President are correct, and this is just going to continue on, and we're going to get through even the second phase. And the third phase, of course, was you see the major reconstruction. It's going to take potentially up to $100 billion, 10 years of effort. That's where we need to go. But it is a potential that the Israelis right now think that Hamas is trying to reconstitute itself. If they can rearm themselves, and if some way weapons are smuggled to them, I don't think Israel's going to wait for intent. They're going to look at capacity. And if they think Hamas is building capacity, then they're likely to continue this or restart this war at Gaza. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but a lot of that really is contingent on Hamas and whether they're willing to lay down their arms and whether they can really get sanctuary or safe passage or some kind of secure zone inside Gaza. I mean, which I haven't heard much of on the latter part, but certainly this is an issue that needs to be addressed directly because it is what will keep everything else from happening, which is very positive both for people in Gaza and for the people in Israel if this actually 20-point plan comes to fruition.
And just finally on that, clearly President Trump at the moment is the other side of the world. He's meeting President Xi tomorrow. We have had a whole series of senior figures from the administration, Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, the special envoy and so on, visiting Israel. But is it your sense that there's actually enough engagement from the US who actually got this deal to the point we're at now to try and make sure that we get beyond this critical and rather dangerous first challenge to the whole process?
I think there's an indication that the U.S. is willing to send whoever needs to go at whatever level to continue this, right? We saw obviously the president and the vice president, secretary of state. I think you could even see a round robin, maybe not with the president, of course, but certainly with the senior administration officials really putting pressure on Israel. I think part of this is the U.S. ability to put pressure on Israel to continue the ceasefire and not go the way that many in the far right part of the cabinet over there would like to see, including, for example, annexing parts of the West Bank. President Trump made it clear if they did that, then they would lose all support from the U.S., which would be a devastating blow for Israel. So it's a really serious, real threat, and it's certainly the president's making it. I think they take it seriously. But I do think the United States is putting, and of course we set up this coordination center with 200 military members from Central Command. I mean, it shows that the United States, I think, would really like to see this push forward and try to get over all the obstacles we've been talking about.
Mick Mulroy, former US Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, we really appreciate your insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol. Great to be with you again.